Hi all, welcome to the Paul Chandler Show. I'm your host, Paul Chandler. In tonight's episode, we're going to be coding molecular pathology. So while it's not very commonly coded in the real world, however though, there's special rules that to follow, so when you do have to code molecular pathology, you want to know how. So stay tuned and we'll be right back and we'll be learning how to code molecular pathology. Welcome back everyone. So tonight we'll be working on molecular pathology. So I'll take us to the back of the CPT book in the Path and Lab or Pathology and Laboratory section. So with molecular pathology, we have two different tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, obviously because 1 then 2. So looking in your CPT book, and we have on the 2020 professional manual on page 557 begins the Tier 1 codes. So with the Tier 1 and Tier 2, one of the major differences is if you look at the Tier 1, how those codes, it has one, as I say the phrase, big fancy acronym per CPT code. So for example, the first one, 81170, says ABL1, 81171, AFF2, and as we kind of go on, depending on how some of them are, for example, code 81184, CACNA1A, and to me that sounds like an RTD2C3PO. So that's what I like to call these molecular pathology codes, the Star Wars codes in there, because RTD2C3PO, a lot of these acronyms have different letters and numbers in them. So with the Tier 1, it is one big fancy acronym per CPT code. So for example, Tier 1, like I said before, begins on page 557 in the 2020 professional manual. And the Tier 2 codes, those begin all the way back on page 568. And looking at the Tier 2 codes on page 568, there we have a long list of those RTD2C3PO acronyms per CPT code. So you have the first one, beginning on page 568, code 81400. It's a little over one column. But if you look at one of my favorite codes, code 81405. 81405 takes us to page 574, and it's about 3/4 of that page, page 574, all of page 575, all of page 576, and about 2/3 of page 577. So that's one of the main differences. With Tier 1, one CPT code for one big fancy acronym. With Tier 2, it's a whole bunch of big fancy acronyms per CPT code. So with this aspect of it, Tier 1 is a 1-to-1 ratio, but with Tier 2, any one of those molecular pathology items, any one equals a CPT code. So for example, going back to the code 81405 on page 574, how that is 1 and 2, altogether about 3.5 pages. Any one of those acronyms under 81405 is that CPT code. Because Tier 1 codes, those are done more often. So that's why it's a 1-to-1 ratio, one CPT code for one acronym, or one item that we're testing. Since Tier 1s are done more often, we have the 1-to-1 ratio, but with Tier 2, those are not done as often. So if we were to have one separate CPT code for every item that we could test in a Tier 2, yeah, we would probably be filling up all the 80,000 series just with molecular pathology. So as far as on the coder side, remember, as our job, we're not actually performing the testing themselves. We're just coding them. So just remembering that whenever you're doing the Tier 1, you have that 1-to-1 ratio, but with Tier 2, any one item in that list is the appropriate CPT code in Tier 2. So you do not need the whole list to perform, because that would be a total of, I'm not even going to guesstimate, well over 100 different items in 81405. If a patient had a test for all of those, how long do you think that would take? It would take a long time. So it's not all that needs to be done, just one of them. Now, something to watch out for as coders, though, is with those RTD2, C3PO codes, make sure that you're getting the acronym correct, because it can often just be one letter or number that could be the difference of it. But oftentimes, though, an acronym can have multiple code options. So with the Tier 1 and Tier 2, now in the front of the section in Path and Lab, we have the molecular pathology table that came about a handful of years ago. So I got my CPC credential way back in June 2008. We did not have this table during that time, and boy do I frackin' wish that we did, because it makes it a whole lot easier nowadays. So with the molecular pathology table in the front of CPT, we have a total of 5 different columns on the table. We have claim destination, abbreviated gene name, full gene name, the commonly associated proteins, and then the CPT code. What we need to focus on as coders, though, is the second column, the abbreviated gene name. So once we know, and what CPT calls the abbreviated gene name, that's what I call that RTD2C3PO, the big fancy acronym. Once we know the acronym, scrolling down, it's in alphabetical order and numerical order. So ABC, XYZ, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Once we get the acronym, we scroll over, and it does have Tier 1 and Tier 2 combined. We scroll over, and if it is one code option, then that's the code. So for example, if we're doing a molecular pathology on ATL1, scrolling through, and that takes us to page 523, and the first one up on top, so the abbreviated gene name, on the page 523, the first row, we scroll over, and yes, it's adenosine GT PACE 1, really don't care. I'm just looking for ATL1. We scroll over, and it says 81406. So there, we can code directly from the table. We only have one code option to choose from. But other times, though, when we look up one of the fancy acronyms, we'll have 2, maybe 3, even maybe 4 CPT codes that we can look at. So for example, let's say same page, I'm going to say ATRX. So we look up ATRX on the column on page 523. That is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th one down. We scroll over, and ATRX could either be code 81470 or 81471. Now, because there's 2 codes to look at, it's not both codes that we need. We only need one code, but now we need to look at the back at those codes and see what the difference is. So we look up 81470 and 81471. So both of them are going to have the same acronym of ATRX, but then the difference, 81470 and 71. So that would take us to bottom right part of page 585. And we see here that 81470 and 8471, looking at the differences, and notice where the semicolon is. So in 81470, after the semicolon, it says genomic sequence analysis panel. But then 81471 says duplication deletion gene analysis. So that would be the different phrases that we're looking at in our documentation. So for example, if we're coding molecular pathology, we know we're coding ATRX. Then we're looking at the 2 differences with those codes. 81470, the main phrase would be after the semicolon, genomic sequence analysis. So I'd be looking for those 3 words. For 8170, or if it's 8471, I'd be looking for duplication deletion gene analysis. For those 3 words also. So that's what we do when we have multiple codes to look at. We narrow it down to those codes and then look up the differences and see what we're looking at, because then the acronym will be the same. So then we're focusing on the parent code, in this case 8471, what is the first phrase after the semicolon, and then the kit code 8471, seeing what the differences are there. So again, with the Tier 1 and Tier 2, whenever it's a Tier 1 code, 1 CPT code for 1 acronym possibility. With Tier 2, it's 1 CPT code for a long list, because those are not done as performed as often. But then using the molecular pathology gene table up in front, you look up the table, And when an acronym has one code over to the right, that's the full code. We do not need to go back and look at the code to verify it. But when an acronym does have more than one option, for example, ATRX, this had two options to look at. Just go to the back, look at the codes, figuring out the keywords between those different code descriptions, and then choose the correct one that you need based on your documentation. And that's how you code molecular pathology. I thank you for watching this episode of the Paul Chandler Show, and have an awesome rest of your day.